Lower third.
And we're live.
Hello, and welcome to the Peeragogy Pre-K through 16 Practitioner Support Project. We're here to talk about implementing Peeragogy within the confines of institutions and traditional schooling environments. My name is Charlie Danoff. I teach English as a second language in Chicago, and I have been researching pedagogy for a few years, and I'm going to talk today about how I have used it to try and get my students to create their own study group that they can help each other learn English. George, do you want to go?
Well, I'm George Brett. I've spent about 3 decades supporting academic computing for higher ed, K-12 libraries and community or civic networks. I'm not a programmer, but I've been acting more as a trainer, a technology transfer agent, and also a technology scout. So I've been one of the man behind the curtain, if you will, in the pedagogy often.
Absolutely. All right. Doug?
My name is Doug Breitbart. I'm a alum of Rheingold U and a member of the Good Ship Peeragogy crew. And I am a catalyst provocateur by trade, and that's what I do here.
All right. And last but unquestionably not least, the lovely Miss Charlotte Pierce.
I'm Charlotte Pierce. I'm an independent publisher in the Boston area, and I'm using Peeragogy in my role as a board member for the Independent Publishers of New England, and trying to create a group that can bootstrap learning on an ongoing basis about the changing world of independent publishing.
All right. Thank you, everybody. So we're going to start today. I am going to give a recap of how I have used over the past month or so, 6 weeks, used Peeragogy with my, so I teach English as a second language in Chicago to adults. And I don't speak their languages, but they come, by the time they're 18 and they come to our school, they speak English pretty solidly, different levels, but everybody has a good grasp. At this point in world history, most people, by the time they're 18, have had at least 6 to 12 years of English if you're not in a native English-speaking country. So that's just context for their level. And then, so I introduced them to I started by giving them the Peeragogy in Action lesson plan that I'm going to put on the event page, or I'm going to put in the chat, and then Charlotte will kindly put it on the event page for me.
Yep.
And so that lesson plan, I'll also share my screen.
So is that your lesson plan for the ESL or ELL or whatever you call it?
That is my lesson plan. That is the lesson plan that I came up with Joe and Anna Kun and Amanda about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, to submit to the open book, which it was kindly included in. And so I guess I gave it to them raw because I wanted to see how they would do with the English, because it's English for native speakers, and I wanted to just see if they would sink or swim. And they swam, so that was exciting.
So it's, okay, is this it?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can see my screen, right?
Right.
Okay, so this is it. And there's another version of it that's very pretty if you're printing from the open book, but this is fine for this context. So it's basically the beginning of the lesson plan, just kind of outlines what is pedagogy. And the four questions are very clear. How does a motivated group of self-learners choose a subject or skill to learn? How can this group identify and select the best learning resources about that topic? How will these learners identify and select the appropriate technology and communications tools and platforms to accomplish their learning goal? What does the group need to know about learning theory and practice to put together a successful peer learning program? So I had them read the first part there and then asked them some comprehension questions and went over some difficult vocabulary. And then we went through the rest of it, and you can see there. But then after that, I gave them a few days to think about what they would like to do with their group and what platform or technology they'd like to use to organize. And so they decided to they wanted to use it that every day they would choose a given English topic and that we learned in class that went over, and then they would share resources on that topic. And so that was how they were going to use it, and then they went through some different options for platform, and they decided on Facebook. They were all already on Facebook, and in addition, Facebook is very easy for sharing text, pictures, video, audio cleanly, so that fit for them. So then they worked together and created the page. I did not create it for them. I wanted to stay out of it as much as possible, to have them take ownership over what they were doing, and they created the page, which is here, and I'll give the link to Charlotte. Okay. And so it's called Dre Mu Raja, which is a portmanteau of their names. And then they are in that picture there. And so they're all administrators on the page. And then if we go down, started a few weeks ago, January 10th. And then so, for example, the very first post was interesting. Was by just about a interesting news article about a fake big squid. That was fun. And then all that writing is English by the students, which is good. And then so they have different. So for example, the first topic was prepositions. So one student found this lovely website with all sorts of explanations of prepositions, and exercises. And then another student found a video about prepositions. The next day, the topic was WH questions, and so one student found a video, a couple students found a video, another student found a picture they could use to go over the different WH questions. And then last weekend, it was about frequency words, and so there's a video and a couple videos about frequency words. So this is very much in the beginning stages, but I was very excited that they well, first off, they didn't laugh or reject the idea of peeragogy. They accepted it and explained it was like peer learning, and then I was also and then that they did it. So those two things were very much in doubt, whether they would be interested in it, and as well as whether or not it would happen. And so I'm happy that those things did occur. And then now we'll see how it evolves over time. And yeah, so any thoughts or...
Do you have any sense, Charlie, of whether they're going to, or what sort of English they're internalizing, vocabulary, or do you feel like they're achieving the aim of the course?
Definitely. Their course is a general English as a second language course.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, as opposed to another course, we have the TOEFL course. So that's specifically that's for more advanced level students, specifically to get a very high score on the test of English as a foreign language. So for them, it's general reading, listening, speaking, writing at an intermediate level, and they're trying to move to an advanced level. So yeah, and then so for each topic, I feel that as opposed to me just I traditionally do would give them textbook pages and exercises about WH questions or about prepositions. I feel like this gets them to go further and find their own resource and do that. And then also, I guess I didn't say it before, but one thing I really want out of this is them to learn how to learn English on their own and with each other outside of class, because I'm not going to be there forever, and it's very important that they have the skills to continue their English improvement for the rest of their lives without a teacher being there to guide them.
I wonder if you could do a TOEFL class, like just have the vocabulary list and then they can go out and find words by searching and find the context that they're in and like learn about the subject where they find that word, or, you know, is that what they're kind of doing here, or?
Are you saying just like a vocabulary list related to pedagogy, or just like a general vocabulary list?
Just a TOEFL list, you know, whatever you're supposed to learn, like, you know, words like, you know, psychology or things just so they could go and search for the word and they'd get a kind of an incidental collection of information around it.
I guess the vocabulary, the way we do it typically is it comes up incidentally. So we have them read a passage, or for the TOEFL, for the ESL students, typically it's like graded English, so it's kind of designed for them. Whereas the TOEFL students, we give them real English, and then out of the passage, I'll pick like the 10 most difficult words, and then ask questions about those, or have them try to define it with the context. So in the context of the paragraph, what does that word mean? And or have them go independently and look it up, and look it up, as well as the like other forms of the word, the synonyms of the word, the International Phonetic Alphabet for how to pronounce the word properly, and make example sentences. So vocabulary is just like, vocabulary comes up through everything we do, I guess, all day, every day. Vocabulary is, but we try to have it be more like organic. And in addition, they do have a big list of words that they use, that they just, like tough words, because TOEFL is supposed to prepare you to participate in an American college. So they need to, so the idea would be that they're 18 next to a American 18-year-old and able to keep up. So there's a lot of vocabulary you need for that. And
So you're happy with I mean, how long have you been having this in place? Have you done it in other semesters, or?
No, this is my first time trying this. So they installed it. They started it before winter break, and then they've really only been using it the past 3 weeks since we returned from winter break. So so yeah, it's very, very fresh.
Are you happy with how it's going?
Yes, I am. I feel like they're learning how to find resources on their own, and they're aggregating them in a way that'll be useful for checking back later and reflecting on study. And there's a sense of community building, very light at the moment, but it's moving forward.
Cool.
So Charlie, I don't know whether my mic is on.
Yes.
It is.
So I just want to share with you sort of an anecdote that maps to what you're doing. I don't know whether you're familiar with a guy named Bob Evans, but he was the youngest CEO of a major Hollywood studio, Paramount Pictures, back in the day. And he had occasion to attend a debutante ball in New York with a very young pre-presidential congressman named John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
Okay.
And the two of them were sort of swamped and waist deep in debutantes, and decided to cut out and go get a drink. And they ended up at a local bar. And John Kennedy shared with Bob Evans what he attributed to be the secret of his success. And he called it Special K. I'm not quite sure why he called it Special K, but that was the name he gave it. And basically it was a vocabulary exercise.
Okay.
Every day he would select 5 words. And each of those words, he would then have to go to a thesaurus and find 5 equivalencies or proximity words for
All
each
right.
one of those words. And he'd have to write the definition of each one of them, and he'd have to write a sentence containing them.
Awesome.
And he had done that his whole life. And what he told Bob Evans was that because of that vocabulary accrual, it was the key, because when he was speaking to a room full of bankers and CEOs, he had the vocabulary and the idiom to speak to them on their terms. But when he was in front of a floor of factory workers in an automobile plant, he had the language and the vocabulary to convey and express his ideas in terms that they could relate to. So I wanted to share that with you.
I like that story a lot.
It's really powerful, and it's not anything that anybody on the planet knows about, because the guy who shared it is gone, and I'm not sure how Bob Evans is doing, but he was in pretty ill health. And I got that from him, so it's not anything that's ever been published. But
I was gonna say, I just did a quick Google search and didn't find anything. Wow, that's thank you,
that's QT, or not anymore, I guess, since this is a Hangout on air. But
yeah, let's share world debut.
But he actually credited his success to vocabulary being at the foundation of his ability to communicate. And I think that's, it's a really powerful idea.
I agree.
Yeah, George.
I need to unmute real quick. The other thing about the vocabulary, which is in a way implicit, not explicit. You've talked about an explicit approach. And the implicit approach, let's see, that's not working. Okay, I'll just stay in the dark. The implicit approach is the fact that with a vocabulary like that, you're able to establish meaningful context with different communities. And it bridges a gap. And that's kind of like what TOEFL is trying to do as well.
Yeah.
Because my mother was Austrian, and German was her first language. And I can remember one time she expressed saying, the English language is just really messed up. And she said, and part of the reason she says that is that, I just heard someone talking to somebody through the window upstairs, and they told them to hurry up and come down.
Nice.
And we take it for granted,
Nice.
but she was taking it literally.
Yeah, of course. No, that's nice.
Charlie,
Nice. That's a great example.
Charlie,
Yes, ma'am.
is there anything that, any issues that you're running into in this early going with this project that the Peeragogs can help you, or any ways that you feel like you'd like to ramp it up a notch, or?
Great question. I feel like, I guess if any of you are on Facebook, if you could just like the posts, I think that would be a very helpful sort of catalyst for them. It's very early, so I mean, I want them to be I don't want to be pushing too much. I want to try to have them be the ones who are leading. But yeah, any peer guys or anybody out there who wants to like Dremu Raja and like specific posts, and or if you want to go another mile, when they post like a resource about prepositions, if you had one, you could post that too. But that's not necessary. But yeah, just liking would be very, very helpful.
It would be cool if they pursued, like if they came to our profile and, like asked a question or something.
Absolutely. Yeah. That would be ideal. That'd be
worth rewarding.
Yes. So, all right, we have a new guest here, Mr. Raymond Puzio. How are you, sir?
Well, okay, so for now the computer works, so I was joining you. I don't really have anything much to say now. I was just listening to what you were talking about today.
All right,
We're glad you got on. Thank
we
you.
are very glad to have you, Ray. Yes. So I guess, Ray, just to quickly, I don't know if you caught the link, but I was talking about, I used, I'll put it in the chat, I used Peeragogy, introduced Peeragogy into my English as a second language classes with the idea of having them create their own pedagogical study group. And they have taken the idea and done so, creating the group I linked on Facebook. So I gave a recap of that and got some really helpful feedback from George, Doug, and Charlotte. And yeah, it looks like. So Ray, if you, yeah, so that was the first part of our agenda, and then the second part, looks like George has run into some technical difficulties, which happens. But I will try to.
You look fabulous, by the way, Charlie. Your lighting is really
Thank
good.
you. Thank you.
I've
Chicago.
worked on my lighting.
So with the winter light.
Yeah.
Yeah, that work. Let me see. I will get. George made this really nice list of connections between. One sec. Connections between pedagogy over the years and kind of this. He found these cycles of pedagogy that were related to what we're doing.
I think Google Drive may be malfunctioning these days. I don't know. Are you getting it up okay?
I am thus far, but I will see if I
get an error when I try and.
Well, is this a simple text file or something more complicated?
It's just a text file.
You might want to share it on screen share because.
Okay. Yes, I will do that.
Well, I'm saying if it's short enough, could do that or send it by email or something like that. Then.
I could also send it. I'll send it by email to you guys.
Or just put a link to it. I can put it on the event page too.
Do that also. 1 second.
Do everything, Charlie.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. All right.
Looks like George is on his way back.
Okay. I will be his support in that case. All right. So putting the link in the chat and also forwarding to you three. That's probably not. Both aren't probably not necessary, but whatever. Okay. Ray, Doug. All right. So I have put the link there, and I believe I'm not doing screen share. So try and screen share. Don't know if it's letting me do. It's not letting me do that. Okay. So this is a list of pedagogical patterns.
Get that organized.
Informal bibliography of patterns for pedagogy and forms of teaching and learning. George Brett. And so he's gone through. I found these sort of meta-level patterns in pedagogical development that I think we can use or we can build our work off of, which would be exciting because the more we can ground our work in previous work, the better. So first, we found this pattern languages from design. Oh, yeah, George is back. All right. George, hello, sir. I was just about to get started going through your list, but now you are here.
Did you get booted off just unceremoniously, or?
Well, no, it was a clear case of human error. When you have too many tabs open, that's kind of what happens.
Yeah, it doesn't like that, especially if they're on different accounts like I usually
do. Yeah. So, and the irony was that the, how can I put it, the join the Hangout button wasn't working properly.
It doesn't work. We had set it up wrong.
Yeah, I set it up, yeah.
Okay. Well, let me see if I can share this. Let me try this here. Ba-ba-dum-ba-dum.
And Charlie, while George is working on that, I'm at the Facebook Dramaraja page.
Mm-hmm.
I liked it, but I'm not seeing any content.
Interesting.
So I wonder whether you have a security setting that
Mm-hmm.
where you'd have to like have people apply to come in and.
I see a whole bunch of content.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'll talk to them because I'm not actually
Oh,
involved at all with it.
No, it just came up.
Okay.
I see.
Okay.
I
Cool.
see
Cool.
it. Yeah.
I got it.
All
I
right.
got it.
All right. Thank you both.
Sorry about that. Just
No,
checking.
no. Thank you both.
It's those functionality gremlins, right?
Exactly.
Well, I mean, this Hangout has been going so much better than a lot of people have been having trouble this week. So we're lucky.
Agreed. And that's a very quick instance of pedagogy in action. All right, George is ready to go. Okay.
Okay, so I've clicked this. Okay, so section 4 of the Peeragogy Handbook is titled as Practices, and one of the things I was part of the editing team for that particular section, and we realized that a lot of the practices had patterns or fell within, you might say, repeated activities. And so after a discussion with Charlie and Joe, and I've been interested in the whole notion of pattern language and patterns, which was started by Christopher Alexander, focused on architecture, but in programming, especially when it became object-oriented, and the notion of libraries, so you could take a module and reuse it in different programs, like building bricks, these became patterns. And now there is literature on using patterns in pedagogy. In other words, the way one might teach students or interact with pure learners. And so this was my email to Joe and to Charlie, and Charlie very kindly put it up as a Google Doc. And you can see here I've got the pedagogical patterns, and what I've done is I've captured, the URLs, and then the titles, and then the author, and in a way I've tried to capture like an abstract, but in a way which is almost as important when we scroll down, is that we do have not only how people are using it or how it could be used, but let me see where one is. Okay. Yes, here we go. References. And so one of the elements that I found rather interesting is that this whole notion of the patterns in pedagogy, you can see in this case the references for this document go all the way back to 1968. And evidently in the 1968 document were concepts, and this was this paper in particular here, it's Pragmatics of Human Communication, Study of Interactual Patterns, Pathologies, and Paradoxes. So, and if I remember correctly, the Alexander books didn't come out until '69. And you'll notice, too, that I tried to do these in reverse chronological order. So these are papers that came out in 1999. And I have to admit that I have not read all these. And here's actually, I think the oldest one, the oldest reference was in 1956. And it was a paper about the capacity of processing information. That's this document here.
That's because I was born that year.
Whoa.
As was I.
You were? Oh, Doug.
I was.
What day?
I was. February 24th.
Oh, okay.
February's a good month. My daughter was born. I was in about the 3rd or 4th grade, so oops. Well, anyway.
Oops. Let me do some math here.
TMI. But the point is that, and as Charlie has suggested, that we can add other references too, and then set the context. So the context in this one is for patterns in pedagogy, with in pedagogy being different methodologies for teaching for education. That's my takeaway on it. Please correct me, Charlie or Charlotte, or even Doug, if you have a different sensibility.
Say that one more time, George, please.
Well, to me, pedagogy are the different methodologies that teachers use to communicate or to teach their classes, like constructivist, and I can't remember what some of the other terms are.
Absolutely, yeah. No, dictionary definition, method and practice of teaching, especially as an academic subject or theoretical concept. I like your definition better than that one.
Yeah, and I do know that some of these papers directly approach that, and they point out how the patterns used in education, to me, are important, because even in the 1980s, in my early days of working with computers in education, computer-assisted instruction was the big thing, CAI. And even with microcomputers, there were special languages. And the problem is that a lot of the faculty, and this is in higher ed, were told to take their course in, as we say in web parlance, shovelware. In other words, cram their course into computer-assisted instruction. And the problem is there's branching, there's a whole logic that's involved in teaching the class, as anybody who's done even a workshop knows, sequence, context, feedback, things like that. And so it's been a problem, and it's also a case of where some of these designers feel that one size fits all. And I know that a number of teachers I've worked with, or faculty I've worked with, get real grumpy when they have to use somebody else's syllabus, because it doesn't fit the way they've been teaching for 15 years or more.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's interesting to hear David Preston, who is one of our Peeragogy Handbook contributors, talk about his experience in his classes and kind of dealing with administrators and people who are really skeptical that such a chaotic method of teaching, if you call it teaching, or facilitating learning, would actually work, right, Doug?
Yeah. And then the other thing too that this made me aware of, just even doing this simple exercise, was that there do seem to be cycles that, they thought it was a good idea in '56, and in '68, and then in the '80s, and then in the '90s, in the early 2000s, and now once again, the flipped classroom, and people are trying some of these things. And I think that the basic concepts have changed a bit, but not exceptionally.
Right.
And so, like, we're doomed to repeat history if we don't study it somewhat.
The interesting thing about the idea of pattern language in a post-industrial context, as opposed to pattern language as a evolution development of an object-oriented approach to looking at the learning process, are two very different things. And I think Alexander's original formulation was sort of objectifying the ingredients and components and facets and nuances of architectural elements in a contextualized way, and that a lot of folks have a tendency to sort of pervert that into a post-industrial, prescriptive, case-hardened framework. So this is how thou shalt do that, and I think what's happening now is that when you stir in the David Preston context, certainly, when he put the learners at the center of the equation and gave them the reins to drive their experience and shifted himself into a facilitation role, that you now have individual self-determination and expression in the learning process. And there are no rules, per se, or frameworks or scaffolds that are dictated from the center out in a classic old-school teacher-centric learning environment. Each student is going to express and maximize their own learning experience as they do, and the idea is to facilitate the integration of that into the class as learning community so that everybody's benefiting from everybody else's gains, insights, and achievements and output. The layers of that mean that you have a pattern language, object-oriented layer related to tools and practices. You have pattern language and object orientation related to modalities of expression and production in terms of what gets created and shared and collaborated on.
What do you mean by object-oriented? I mean, you're kind
well,
of leaving me about 30 seconds behind.
Well, the concept of pattern language, at least my understanding of it, is this idea of breaking out components and enriching them with context and synergies and connections, very much in a network node kind of way. And in programming, I think how that tangibly expresses itself, and here, George, I am very definitely treading out of my expertise and into yours, so you have to like completely correct me if I'm way off base here. But the sort of tangible expression of pattern language within the context of programming would be the emergence of object-oriented programming, where you have subroutines and pieces of code that become packaged elements, and you can repurpose and reuse and plug in and aggregate those objects. So you sort of transcend the individual lines of code and wrap and package them by their function or value or what they bring to the program itself.
You know what the revelation I got when George and I were doing the pattern section of the Peeragogy Handbook was that it's just like the patterns are the things that work, and the anti-patterns is the things that don't work. And I think you have teachers that they're afraid to risk that opposition in implementing things that do work, even if they do recognize them.
Yeah, I'm sort of kind of going back to the object-oriented languages. It excited a lot of people when they first started being used because they began talking about libraries of code. And so, like in a library, if you have a task, you can go to this part of the library, and there will be these objects that have been described as serving particular functions. Some in the foreground and some in the background, like the server side.
What
Now,
do you mean by objects, actually?
well, the object is actually like a block of text, which most code is based on. And if then, if Charlotte Pierce comes up on the lower third, then you see the Peeragogy Handbook global icon or kind of thing. If-then statements or go-tos and the usual things that were in BASIC or in C, but there are different kinds of languages. I'll just put it that way, different dialects out there. But I'd like to respond to Doug's comment that in 1991, Michael Benedict wrote or edited a book about cyberspace. And he was actually on the architecture faculty, I think UT Austin, University of Texas, Austin. And one of the things which was interesting then, and this is even prior to the web, was the notion that, like Alan Kay, who was with Atari and then making games and became very much an advocate of using computers in K-12, and other writers like that, they, even that early, were using geographical references for navigating, as we say, web space or cyberspace. And so, for me personally, Christopher Alexander's book, which was one case of using pattern languages, the title of the book is The Timeless Way of Building. And he talked about the value of front porches, and a front porch is the entryway, it's the portico, it's the portal, or in web speak we would call it the landing page. And so there was a time when I was working with people and introducing them to the notions of hypertext and hypermedia and web. So that's what we used to call it before we just call it the web or web applications. Was that the timeless way of building was a good metaphor for what are you trying to do with your readership, your participants. And then here's how Christopher would describe, say, like the patio in a lot of Southern European buildings. There's a ring around it, and then there's a patio with a fountain, and which allows for privacy, but the fountain helps make that patio cooler. I mean, and it becomes a meeting space. And now, with regard to security, people talk about, and then they have, with education for a while, walled gardens, meaning that it's to keep people in, but it's also to keep the outside people from getting in. It's security. But there was the example in the pattern language book. So that's where I was coming from on that.
So are you thinking, for example, using this, some of Alexander's patterns also for learning, or this was just a...
I think they could be applied to learning, yeah. I mean, because when you read like The Timeless Way of Building, Alexander goes all the way from, say, the city or the large collection of people, and he really doesn't deal so much with governance and politics, but he talks about the way the streets are built. You know, are they broad avenues or are they narrow alleyways? And he talks about the interaction of people and what leads to better interaction. And I would say with peeragogy and the peer-to-peer learning, and as it scales up, you know, what creates a more inviting, a more comfortable environment, you know, and I think that what with the Peeragogy Handbook, one thing we're doing is my sense is that we've been trying to identify and present to the readership and those people who are trying to
Get involved.
well, A, get involved, but also B, implement,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the ideas there, that it's like a mashup, you know,
Right.
and that's the beauty of the patterns is you can take the pattern and it's like a recipe, and my wife follows recipes religiously to cook food, and I'm a mad scientist. That's how we talk about it in our family.
Well,
I'm using the basic pattern, but I just use whatever's in the fridge.
I think that I'm going to think about these things in my work with the independent publishers, because we have a new board. We have 10 people on the board now. There's some older people. There's some people that live in the backwoods of Vermont, and they have a lot of trouble with the technology and getting online and even getting to a board meeting. I just muted a couple that were typing there. So,
Yeah.
but you know, so I've been studying I've been thinking a lot about what I could do as board secretary. This is my new position, to kind of make at least that core of the board more comfortable. But I'm going to have to be working with different technological capabilities and understanding. And one guy is in, you know, he just doesn't use video. So the first board meeting, I had to put half of them on by phone, and
Yeah.
then, you know, it was like a feat of extreme video production.
Okay.
They really didn't know, you know.
Well, Charlotte, I have an answer for you, but let me first, if I may back up. Ray, did I answer your question properly?
Well, that's fine. Sure. I was also thinking, you know, that, for example, you know, a literal use of Alexander seemed to be, let's say, if you were designing a classroom, then the question is how many of these patterns could carry then over to more, you know, general situations where you're setting up some sort of learning environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
I
this
was
is the learning
thinking-
environment that what I'm dealing with, you know.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of
Let's do 5 more minutes, everybody.
Okay, I'm thinking of the patterns more as a metaphor rather than as a literal.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. And then, Charlotte, with respect to your problem, I just wrote a paper for a not-for-profit that wants to use mobile to do education in third world countries.
Yeah.
And I did another review like I did for this pedagogy about mobile learning in Africa. And it was depressing to me how many of those documents presumed that the cell phones or the smartphones in Africa actually had 4G connectivity to the internet. Okay?
I know.
So I said, well, what about the remote villages that don't? And you can actually set up a Wi-Fi network, and I called it an ELLAN, which was an e-learning local area network.
Is this John Blossom's group?
No, this is a different group. There's so many of them. This is a different. Yeah. So, but I also said that the way that this village would then communicate with the rest of the country. There'd be assigned to be a central tech hub, and they would send them DVDs, with the papers of the kids and what's happening, or the farmers, their questions. Our crops have blight. What do we need to do? And they mail it to the central hub, who gives it to the experts.
Well, yeah, I mean,
And
those
then the
things
answers come back on another DVD.
those things can be studied and applied. I mean, you can kind of rail at the people that won't get on the board, or you can try and work with what they're working with.
Right.
I mean, there is a lot of people get their back up about, when you say, well, you'll have to use Google Documents because there's no other way for us all to be working on this document, and they really get and then you have to deal with resistance to participating as well as.
Well, that's a cultural barrier that I've learned 2 or 3 text editors, and now you're making me learn, or word processors, and now you're making me learn another one. It's just that some people are not interested in learning new things.
Well, I think it's actually more profound and significant a challenge than that, because we exist in a fraction of a percentage point of the global population in terms of our level of sophistication and immersion. And I'm asserting that just because as graduates of Rheingold U, we're in a class apart, and I feel wholly inadequate relative to what I know is possible in terms of the level of proficiencies I've actually managed to implement and use that I learned about. Yeah. And there are folks out there that are still about, how do I get online? How do I connect? How do I, what's a browser? And I think it's really, really easy to inadvertently fall into a very elitist place of presumption that, far more of the world is where we are than they are. And I do think it's sort of incumbent on us to be smart and innovative and creative about figuring out the practices and methodologies to leave no one behind and to enable people to participate. And I remember there's a weekend workshop that I teach, personal growth development weekend workshop, and the people that ran that community that hosted it, just sort of presumed that everybody that were attendees and alumni were capable of receiving email. And the truth of the matter is, there are lots of folks that aren't and don't, and never will. And for them, leaving that segment of the community out of follow-up and support and community notices and all of that stuff wasn't something they even thought about.
Because think of the ideas that might be out there in those people's heads,
Well, that's the point, right? I mean, the resources, the principle of inclusion says that anybody is capable of contributing invaluably to the collective. The mission is to make it possible for everybody to contribute and or to facilitate if they're currently not in a place where they're doing so. And so if you have a population of your board and there are folks that are, dial-up, and there are folks that are literally snail mail, and that's how they're set up, it's phone and snail mail, then, figuring out how to deal with that and finding out who the online services that provides a shortcutting of snail mail that is locally produced and delivered as opposed to actually going through the U.S. Post Office. I mean,
or fax even.
Or exactly. So, I mean, I really think part of our agenda and part of our responsibility with Peeragogy is to say, how do we translate this for third world? How do we translate this for people on a basic level that may not even have electricity,
right?
And there should be expressions of it and setups of it and mechanisms for disseminating it. in that way. Because the truth of the matter is, if we hit those people, everybody between them and us on the curve are a piece of cake.
Well, see, and then Doug, this is part of why I've been an advocate for, using thumb drives or CDs, discs, or the hard copy, as sold by Amazon, as a way of getting the word of the pedagogy methodology and the Peeragogy Handbook and Peeragogy and us out to as many people as possible, even those people who are not connected anywhere. A lot of people actually do have computers, and they've got a printer next to them, but they are not connected to anything other than that computer.
Yeah, they're
because
not.
they're afraid of viruses, among other things.
Well, and then I think some of those patterns, since we're in the K-16 thing, those apply to kids that might be technologically connected, but they might have a different way of processing information. So
well, that gets back to literacy issues, right?
Yeah.
That the fact that this is Howard's premise that gave birth to MindAmp. In the beginning, he was facing a class of students presuming that they were the digital initiated as a generation, and finding out, lo and behold, no. That their level of usage and fluency and awareness was actually very, very primitive and minimal.
Yeah.
That was the catalyst for MindAmp.
They might have had the computer, but they didn't have the info. What is it? Infotension or the?
Yep.
Yeah. Those things he talks about.
So
one thing I was going to
Ray?
I was going to mention that as I mentioned, with respect to what you said, it's also why it's useful, when possible, to use the, simplest solution. Like, for example, a few minutes ago when I was asking about a plain text file, rather than, some complicated thing that might require more bandwidth or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of almost like a version of Occam's razor, to use the minimum necessary for what you have, and, not always try to go out for, let's say the most newest thing, because then not everybody might have that capability.
I think that is probably the wisest thing
more,
that has been said today, because
you know,
I am guilty of that every day. I just I want to go bigger, faster, more, and high def this and widescreen that, and what it's really about is, it's nice to see someone's facial expressions and their nice little hairdo and stuff, but the idea, the content is the more important thing.
But Charlotte, I'll say this: since 1992, I've been doing video conferencing. Actually, earlier than that, since about 1984, 85, which was closed circuit TV in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I've been doing talking heads for a long time, and
30 years.
Yeah, and it's gotten better, and they still, believe it or not, they still have slow TV. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Right.
But instead of doing the 24 or 30 frames a second, it's it's much slower, but you do hear the audio, which is is important. And so I think Ray's point about and like I said earlier, don't ignore the past, because you'll be doomed to repeat it, again. And I think he's spot on with that.
Well, we had talked about. We have to wrap up here, I guess, Charlie.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're muted still, but
No, I'm
we
not.
had talked about this unconference, and I know some of our editorial board has been had trouble getting on the Hangouts. So we are missing a good share of information.
Yeah, totally.
Well, part of the thing is that compared to other platforms, this one requires a lot more bandwidth and processing power.
This is true.
For some reason that half the time I can't make it.
Yeah.
Just because
Yeah.
I have an older computer and older setup, and half the time it barely works with this.
Well,
And then,
another thing we can do, you can't record them, but you can put people on phone, in just live video calls.
Mhm.
Or I could put them on phone, maybe in a speakerphone, and then kind of work the muting so that the speaker, you could just kind of camp out on the video recording. So, but should I stop the
just,
broadcast now, or
Um,
say goodbye,
well,
Charlie?
one final footnote is that Ray in 1993 with Cornell CUC-Me, which unfortunately in those days only ran on a Macintosh, we were using 64 kilobit, 64 KB in order to share video, but we didn't have any audio. We did use the telephone, as Charlotte was just talking about. So there are ways.
Well, we should explore that because
Yeah.
I don't think we want to include more good ideas and not miss a lot.
Yep.
But should
All
I
right.
stop the broadcast? You want to say goodbye, Charlie?
I
or-
will say goodbye. All right. Well, thank you to anybody and everybody who was watching. On behalf of Ray, Charlotte, George, and Doug, and everybody involved with Peeragogy Project, thank you. And you can learn more at peeragogy.org, peeragogy.org. Thank you. Bye.
There's your vocabulary word for the day.